They see his smile online. They hear the laugh in his voice. They assume he's fine, better than fine, because the world only shows you the highlight reel. But let me tell you something the night knows and the silence reveals. When the lights go out and the noise dies down, confidence has a way of cracking. And some smiles don't survive midnight. So before you believe he's happy without you, understand this. Peace doesn't pace the floor at 3 a.m., and freedom doesn't replay conversations it wishes it could redo. People are quick to judge happiness by appearances. A smile, a new routine, a louder laugh. But appearances have never been reliable witnesses. They lie under pressure and fold under scrutiny, because real happiness doesn't need an audience, and real pain doesn't ask for permission. He looks strong. He acts unbothered. He tells himself and everyone else that walking away was the right move. And maybe during the day, with the noise of the world keeping him busy, he almost believes it. Almost. Public strength is one of the most convincing performances a person can put on. It's polished, rehearsed, and carefully timed. It shows up in confident strides, controlled smiles, and calm voices that tell the world, I'm good, I'm better than good. But strength displayed in public is often a survival strategy, not a reflection of peace. It's armor. And armor is not worn by people who feel safe. It's worn by people preparing for battle. The truth is, many people learn early on how to look unshaken while everything inside them is trembling. They master the art of standing tall so no one notices how heavy the weight really is. In public, there are expectations to be composed, successful, unaffected. Weakness doesn't get applause, and vulnerability doesn't trend well. So he adapts. He straightens his back, tightens his jaw, and convinces himself that if he looks strong long enough, he'll eventually feel strong. This version of strength is loud enough to silence questions, but fragile enough to crack under solitude, because public strength feeds on witnesses. It needs someone watching to exist. Take away the crowd, and that strength has nothing left to lean on. Private unrest, on the other hand, doesn't care about image. It doesn't care how capable he looks or how many people believe his story. It waits patiently. It understands timing. It knows that the right moment to surface is when there's no one left to impress. That's why it shows up behind closed doors, in quiet rooms, when the phone is face down and the world is asleep. That's when the mind stops performing and starts confessing. The unrest doesn't shout. It asks questions. Questions that don't need answers to cause discomfort. Questions like, why does this still bother me? Or why doesn't this feel like freedom? There's a difference between being strong and being settled. Strength can be forced, peace cannot. Strength can be mimicked through habits and routines, but peace requires alignment. When someone is truly at peace, their strength doesn't fluctuate depending on who's watching. But when unrest lives underneath, strength becomes situational. He can lift the weight of the world in front of others, but struggle to carry his own thoughts alone. That's the quiet contradiction, how someone can look so composed and still feel undone inside. How someone can give advice to everyone else and still wrestle with their own decisions at night. This kind of unrest is exhausting because it's invisible. There's no permission to talk about it, no obvious place to put it. He tells himself it doesn't make sense to feel this way. He reasons it away during the day, buries it under productivity, laughter, movement. But buried things don't disappear. They wait. And the longer they wait, the heavier they become. The mind replays moments not because it wants pain, but because it wants resolution. Public strength avoids resolution. It only manages perception. Private unrest demands truth, and truth doesn't respond to pretending. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that most people never see the cost of maintaining that image. They see the outcome, not the effort. They don't see how tiring it is to hold yourself together when you're not sure you believe the story you're telling. They don't see the moments where confidence feels more like defiance against doubt than actual certainty. Public strength may win admiration, but private unrest keeps the score. And every night, when the performance ends, the real conversation begins between who he shows the world and who he's trying to convince himself he's become. Loss doesn't usually arrive with force, it arrives with patience. During the day, distractions do an excellent job of keeping it quiet. Work fills the hours, noise fills the space, conversations fill the gaps where silence might otherwise settle. Movement creates the illusion of progress, and business creates the illusion of healing. He tells himself he's moved on because he's moving, going places, meeting people, staying occupied. But movement is not the same as resolution. Distractions don't erase loss, they delay its introduction. They keep it waiting in the hallway while life pretends everything is normal. In the presence of distraction, loss feels manageable. It shrinks, stays contained, behaves itself. He laughs at the right moments, responds when spoken to, handles responsibilities like nothing is missing. And for a while, that feels like proof. Proof that he's okay. Proof that it didn't affect him the way people thought it would. But distractions only work when they're constant. They demand energy, attention, and speed. The moment that pace slows, the illusion weakens. Because loss isn't loud, it's persistent. It doesn't need attention all the time. It only needs opportunity. That opportunity comes when distractions fade. When the world stops demanding his focus and the mind finally has room to wander, that's when loss stretches out. That's when it fills the silence with memories, questions, and unfinished thoughts. The absence becomes noticeable not because something new happened, but because something familiar didn't. A message that doesn't arrive, a voice that doesn't respond, a presence that used to occupy space without effort. Loss becomes heavier in these moments because it no longer competes with noise. It has the stage to itself. What makes this kind of loss so unsettling is how selective it is. It doesn't show up during moments of productivity. It shows up during moments of rest. It interrupts stillness, not action. That's why sleep becomes difficult. Lying still gives the mind too much freedom, too much access to the past. The brain begins connecting dots it avoided earlier. It replays choices, tones, silences. Not because it enjoys the pain, but because it's searching for meaning. Distractions keep the pain at bay, but they also postpone understanding. And postponed understanding doesn't disappear. It compounds. There's also a deeper truth hidden inside fading distractions. Loss is not just about missing someone else. It's about facing yourself without them. Distractions allow him to be someone new, someone unaffected, someone forward moving. Silence strips that away. It asks him to sit with who he is now compared to who he was then. It highlights the shift, the gap, the emotional muscle memory of a connection that shaped how he thought, felt, and existed. Without distractions, there's no escape from that comparison. And comparisons have a way of exposing what hasn't healed. As distractions fade, loss becomes more honest. It stops pretending to be manageable and starts demanding attention. It doesn't ask to be fixed. It asks to be acknowledged. That's why it feels heavier at night. In quiet moments, in pauses between tasks, loss grows in the absence of stimulation because it finally has space to breathe. And once it's seen clearly, it's harder to ignore. The mind understands then that staying busy was never the same as letting go. It was only a temporary shelter from a truth that was always waiting for silence to invite it in. Ego is a daytime companion. It thrives in light, movement, and noise. It feeds on interaction, validation, and the steady rhythm of doing. During the day, ego keeps him upright. It reminds him of his choices, defends his decisions, and reassures him that walking away was necessary. Ego speaks confidently. It doesn't hesitate. It tells a clean story, one where he is strong, justified, and unaffected. As long as there are conversations to join and tasks to complete, ego has something to work with. It stays busy protecting the version of himself he needs to believe in. But ego is not built for silence. It doesn't know what to do when there's nothing left to perform. At night, when the world slows down and the external voices fade, ego loses its footing. There's no audience to impress, no momentum to hide behind. That's when truth steps forward, not dramatically, not aggressively, but honestly. Truth doesn't need energy or confidence. It only needs quiet. And in that quiet, it begins to speak in a language ego can't interrupt. Truth doesn't argue the way ego does. It doesn't explain itself or try to win. It simply presents what is. It asks why certain memories still carry weight, why certain names still pause the breath, why freedom sometimes feels heavier than connection ever did. Ego would call these thoughts weakness, nostalgia, or doubt. Truth calls them signals, signals that something mattered more than he allowed himself to admit. During the day, ego convinces him he's over it. At night, truth asks why over it, still feels unfinished. The tension between ego and truth is exhausting because ego wants control and truth wants acknowledgement. Ego wants the story to end where it feels powerful. Truth wants the story to make sense. That's why sleep becomes restless. The mind isn't trying to punish him. It's trying to reconcile two versions of reality. The one he tells the world and the one he feels when no one's watching. Ego resists vulnerability because vulnerability threatens identity. Truth invites vulnerability because vulnerability leads to clarity. Night removes the filters. Without distraction, the mind revisits moments ego rushed past, conversations that ended too quickly, silences that lasted too long, choices that made sense logically but feel incomplete emotionally. Ego survives the day by staying loud and busy. Truth waits until night because night doesn't rush. It gives space for reflection, and reflection is where honesty lives. In those hours, the bravest thing he can do is listen. Because truth isn't there to weaken him. It's there to show him what still needs to be faced. And the hardest realization often comes quietly. Ego can protect pride, but it cannot protect peace. Peace requires alignment between action and feeling. When those don't match, truth will eventually surface. That's why the night feels heavier than the day. It's not because he's failing. It's because the part of him that knows better has finally been given the room to speak. Comfort is easy to misunderstand. People often think it's about routine, familiarity, or convenience, but comfort can be replaced. Routines change. Habits evolve. Even familiarity fades with time. Connection, though, that's different. Connection doesn't sit on the surface of life. It weaves itself into it. It becomes part of how a person thinks, reacts, and understands the world. When he walked away, he didn't just leave behind moments or memories. He left behind a link that quietly supported him in ways he didn't fully recognize until it was gone. Connection isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself or demand attention. It shows up in small, consistent ways: shared understanding, unspoken reassurance, the ability to be fully present without explanation. That kind of bond creates emotional grounding. It stabilizes. It gives weight to words and meaning to silence. When that connection disappears, the world doesn't fall apart, but it feels less anchored. Things still function, but they don't land the same way. Conversations feel thinner. Achievements feel quieter. Even joy can feel incomplete, not because happiness is impossible, but because there's no longer a familiar place to return to with it. At first, he mistakes the absence for discomfort. He assumes he just needs time, space, or something new to fill the gap. So he replaces comfort, new routines, new distractions, new faces. And for a while, that works. The surface settles. Life looks normal again. But connection doesn't respond to substitutes. It leaves a different kind of absence, one that doesn't ache constantly, but appears unexpectedly. In moments that matter, in moments that would have once been shared without thought. That's when the loss becomes specific, personal, undeniable. What makes connection so powerful is that it reflects identity. Through connection, he saw himself more clearly, not because he was validated, but because he was understood. That understanding shaped how he showed up, how he spoke, how he trusted. Losing that means losing a mirror that once offered clarity. Without it, self-perception shifts. Doubt sneaks in. He starts questioning things he once felt certain about, not because he's weaker, but because the context that supported that certainty is gone. This is why the nights are harder. Connection often lives in the quiet, in shared silence, in the comfort of being known without effort. When the day ends and there's no one to return to emotionally, the absence becomes louder, not dramatic, just persistent. The mind reaches for what once made stillness feel safe. And when it's not there, stillness turns heavy. He realizes then that what he lost wasn't ease or routine, it was resonance. A feeling of being aligned with another human being in a way that required no performance. And connection, once felt, doesn't fully disappear. It changes form, but it leaves an imprint. That imprint is what surfaces in reflection. It's what makes certain memories carry weight and certain silences feel unfinished. Comfort can be rebuilt anywhere. Connection is rare, and losing something rare doesn't always hurt immediately. But it teaches slowly in quiet moments just how irreplaceable it was. Regret is rarely dramatic. It doesn't kick down doors or demand attention in obvious ways. It doesn't show up with tears on command or loud declarations of mistake. Instead, it moves quietly, almost politely, slipping into the corners of the mind when defenses are low. During the day, regret stays hidden because it knows it would be dismissed, labeled as overthinking, written off as weakness. But at night, when the world slows and the noise fades, regret finds its voice, not to accuse, but to remind. Regret whispers through small moments, a song that lingers longer than expected, a phrase that echoes because it was once said differently, a memory that resurfaces without warning, not because it's painful, but because it's unresolved. These whispers aren't random. They're precise. They point directly to what mattered and what was mishandled. Regret doesn't ask, "Why did you feel?" It asks, "Why didn't you act when you knew better?" That question is harder to silence because it doesn't attack identity. It challenges intention. What makes regret so persistent is that it feeds on awareness. It only grows when someone understands the weight of their choices. Immaturity ignores regret. Growth invites it. When he starts to see the full picture, his role, his silence, his timing, regret takes shape. Not as self-punishment, but as clarity arriving too late. It's the understanding of consequences after the opportunity to change them has passed. And that understanding doesn't scream. It settles in quietly and waits. Regret also disguises itself as curiosity. What if I had said more? What if I had stayed? What if I had listened instead of assuming? These questions aren't about rewriting the past. They're about acknowledging its significance. Regret whispers because it doesn't need to shout. The truth it carries is already heavy enough. Loud regret would invite defensiveness. Quiet regret invites reflection. and reflection is where the real discomfort lies. This is why regret often shows up during rest. When the body slows down, the mind speeds up. It begins sorting through moments it skipped over in survival mode. Regret doesn't want attention during chaos. It wants space during calm. It knows that in stillness, there's no escape from memory. That's when regret becomes personal, not about what others think, but about what he knows. And knowing is more powerful than being told. Regret whispers because it isn't trying to destroy him. It's trying to teach him. It carries lessons about value, timing, and presence. It highlights what deserved more care than it received. And while regret can't change what's already done, it reshapes how future choices are made. The danger isn't in feeling regret. The danger is in ignoring it. Because what regret reveals in a whisper today becomes a pattern tomorrow if it's never truly heard. Growth rarely starts with confidence. More often, it begins with discomfort that refuses to be ignored. Sleepless nights are not random disturbances. They are invitations. Invitations to slow down, to stop running, to face thoughts that were postponed during daylight. When sleep doesn't come easily, it's usually because the mind is busy processing what the heart hasn't fully accepted. These nights are uncomfortable, frustrating, and lonely, but they serve a purpose. They remove distractions and create a space where reflection becomes unavoidable. Reflection is not the same as rumination. Rumination circles the same thoughts without direction. Reflection, though, digs deeper. It asks why. Why certain choices were made, why certain patterns repeated, why certain emotions were suppressed instead of addressed. In the quiet of sleepless nights, there's no urgency to move on, no pressure to appear fine. The mind has time to connect emotional dots that were ignored when life was moving too fast. This is where awareness begins, not as judgment, but as understanding. What makes these nights transformative is their honesty. There's no performance in the dark, no image to maintain, no one to convince. He is left alone with himself, his intentions, his fears, his truths. And in that honesty, growth quietly takes shape, not as a sudden breakthrough, but as a shift in perception. He begins to see how certain behaviors were protective rather than healthy, how distance was easier than vulnerability, how silence felt safer than saying the wrong thing. These realizations don't come with applause, but they come with clarity. Sleepless nights also force accountability. Without external distractions, it becomes impossible to place all responsibility outside oneself. Reflection brings balance. It acknowledges both what was done to him and what he contributed. That balance is essential for growth. Without it, lessons remain incomplete. Growth doesn't mean taking all the blame. It means understanding your role honestly. And that understanding reshapes future decisions more than any advice ever could. Over time, these nights change the way he responds to discomfort. Instead of avoiding it, he learns to listen. Instead of reacting, he pauses. Growth teaches patience, not with the world, but with himself. He begins to recognize patterns before repeating them. He notices emotional signals earlier. He understands that peace isn't found in escape, but in alignment. Alignment between thought, action, and feeling. Growth born from sleepless nights is quiet but lasting. It doesn't announce itself or demand recognition. It shows up in better boundaries, clearer communication, and deeper self-awareness. The nights that once felt heavy begin to feel purposeful, because reflection, when embraced, becomes the bridge between who he was and who he is becoming. So if you think he's happy without you, understand this. Happiness doesn't need convincing, and peace doesn't need proof. A life that is truly settled rests easily, breathes deeply, and sleeps without resistance. But when the night stretches long and the mind refuses to rest, it's not weakness speaking, it's truth. Those restless hours are where masks fall and meaning rises. They reveal what mattered, what was mishandled, and what can no longer be ignored. And while the world may never see those moments, they shape him more than any public display ever could. Because real change doesn't happen in applause or distraction, it happens in silence, in honesty, in the courage to sit with what was lost and learn from it. And sometimes the loudest sign that someone cared is how deeply the night still remembers.